Might go on my tombstone, I don't know. Enjoying these great, good local eats and Texas beer and wine. It's about as much fun as you can have with your clothes on. Let me put it to you like that. So, first off, I want to thank the Texas State University, this library, and the fabulous Wittliff collections. This is a spectacular jewel. These folks are really astonishing. Absolute joy to work with Connie Todd, who was the director when we first started working here. Steve Davis, who's current interim director, can't be with us tonight because he's up for an award for his book on J. Frank Dobie, and you have to be there to collect the prize, so he kissed us off. And all the wonderful Wittliffians, as I call them, starting, of course, with the man at the center of it all, the center of the center, Bill Wittliff. You know, Oscar Wilde said, "Be yourself, everyone else is already taken." And that really sums up Bill Wittliff. You cannot be more yourself than Bill Wittliff has been in his great career. Proud to know him. And the great crew, Beverly Vondren, who was just up here, Amy Cochran, the events coordinator who pulled this thing together, Michelle Miller, the such a good media person. She actually got an article about me in the American Statesman. Yeah. Actually, it reminds me of a guy who owned a Waco radio station back when I was in politics, and a reporter later told me, a TV reporter there later told me that he had come up and watched in a monitor some news thing that I was on, and he turned to this guy and he said, "I never want to see that guy on my station again unless he has died." So I'm trying to disappoint him as long as possible. Katie Salzman, the lead archivist. This is a great exhibit back here. Mary Garcia and Bianca Marshall, they spent more than a year inventorying and preserving and putting that load of trash that we delivered here into something that makes some sense out there. And from my own little team at Hightower and Associates, which is me and anybody who would associate with me. And luckily there are two, Laura Ehrlich in the back of the room and Melody Bird right up here in front. They do tremendous work. And to Suzanne Perkins and the Cool Mint Cafe. I hope you got a few of those edibles back there. Pretty tasty things, huh? And the St. Arnold's Brewery as well. Oh, yeah. I believe in lubricating the movement. And so we thank the Cool Mint Cafe also for getting the Texas wines. Well, first off, it's just a joy for me to be here, and I thank the Wittliff Collections for their enthusiasm in making this happen, but more importantly, for their willingness to make this a festival and to make this day about something larger than just one personality, as handsome as that personality might be. So hence this living spirit of Texas populism that we're hosting here today. The need to address the solid principles of American populism has been building in me since the media started sticking the populist label on Sarah Palin, and Rick Perry, and Glenn Beck, and Rush Limbaugh. I mean, it's like putting earrings on a hog. You just can't hide the ugliness. It is down under. You can call them populists, but these are not populists. They are corporatists, mouthpieces, and fronts for the corporate powers that real populists exist to fight. That's what populism really is all about. So a year ago, I felt the need to revisit the true and proud history of the populist movement in our country, which, by the by, began out here in Lampasas County in 1877. Populism sprang from this very state and this great soil, and it built all up the plains and then across the upper Midwest and then down through the South, and then it went coast to coast. New York had populists. California had populists all across. So I won't tax your patience with the history of it all. We've got a copy, I think, of my Hightower Lowdown, if not they're around here, back in last May, titled "Populism is Not a Style, It's a People's Rebellion Against Corporate Power." So it is something real. It's not something you can just appropriate for yourself. Today's program and the exhibit back behind us here really are a continuation of this effort to remind and to reclaim populism. There is a history, spirit, integrity, and power in the Word. Bob Moser, the Texas Observer, just did a tremendous piece talking exactly about that. There's power in the Word, and that is why the corporatists and the right-wingers are trying to steal it from us. They use and abuse the Word, but they don't begin to comprehend it. When it comes to grasping the real concept of populism, the Perrys and the Palins are as confused as goats on AstroTurf. I mean, so we've used this exhibit in my archive to try to portray populism as it has been experienced in one life, mine. So I'm going to take you on a bit of a brief gallop through my life. I grew up as a populist in Denison, Texas, right on the Oklahoma border, across from Fred there. We were the first line of defense against the Okies, in fact. I grew up a populist, but I did not know it. It wasn't taught in the schools. We didn't know the word at all, even though it had, about 50 years before, been a very prominent political movement in that area of our state. But its spirit and its essence was all around me, in the music that I grew up with, rock and roll, black blues, working man blues, the bluegrass music, country music, of course. It was around me in terms of the church. Many a sermon began with the likelihood of a rich man going to heaven is like that camel going through the eye of a needle. It was present in the people I grew up with, and particularly in my family. Wrote a book that had a chapter called Daddy's Philosophy. Have to beware of Texans telling daddy stories, you know. But I had a pretty good one. And he didn't know he had a philosophy. And he certainly would have been embarrassed to have been told that he did. He thought he was a conservative. If a poster had gone to 1331 West Hall Street in Denison, knocked on the door, "Are you a liberal or conservative?" He said, "Oh, put me down a conservative." But if you talk to him about what the bank holding companies were doing to small businesses like his, if you talk to him about what the chain stores and ultimately Walmart were doing to squeeze people like him out of Main Street, if you talk to him about what the lobbyists down in Austin were doing to control the government, then he was not a conservative at all. He was a prairie radical, a populist. His philosophy came down to this, the notion of the common good. We're all in this together. He grew up in the Depression, came of age, and was able to start a small business with my mother, who still lives right down the road here in Cibolo, with my brother Larry, 94 years of age and still cooking. And they were able to create a little middle-class way of life for my two brothers and myself, and got me through college, first one in my family to go through college. But he didn't think he did that by himself. He didn't think he's some sort of raw individual, Superman, who did that. He knew there was this larger community out there, and that gave support to him, and he had to give support back to it. And he expressed this philosophy to me periodically in these words. He said, "Jim, everybody does better when everybody does better." That's what passes for political philosophy in Denison, Texas. It's as good a one as I ever heard, because that's the opposite of what they're now pursuing. They're saying, we can take care of our good fortunes and not worry about the well-being of the many. We don't care about everybody. We care about us. Well, that's not America, and that damn sure is not populism. Well, then I went to school up at the University of North Texas and had a history course, just basic American history, book written by T. Harry Williams, later did the ultimate book on Huey Long. And it had a chapter on populism. And I went through that and I said, that's me. That's my father. That's my family. That's everybody I grew up with. That's what they're talking about. Populism gradually and naturally then became my work. And I've been blessed to learn from some of the best of them. I worked for Ralph Yarborough in the United States Senate. Ralph didn't call himself a populist, but he was. He was an unabashed, unrelenting battler of the powers that be on behalf of the powers that ought to be, the ordinary workaday people. He stood up for them. He passed legislation like very few have done in our history in a very short period of time in the Senate. He created the Big Thicket National Park, created the Big Bend National Park, Padre Island National Seashore. All of that came from Ralph Yarborough. More education legislation than any single senator ever in history came through Ralph Yarborough's committee. And he was a battler of those powerful interests on behalf of the rest of us. And he would say, we need to put the jam on the lower shelf so the little people can reach it too. That was the spirit of it. And he taught me that you can run on principles, on good, solid, working class principles, and win. And you can then also lose on those principles. And that's okay because you mattered. You actually stood for something, and it made a difference. Then I moved on into, as Fred was indicating, the Agribusiness Accountability Project, a mouthful of words there that Susan DeMarco and I created, confronting the corporate control of America's food economy. That was in 1970, 71, before it became fashionable. And Susan and I wrote a book called Hard Tomatoes, Hard Times. And this book was about, the title of the book it was about the land-grant college system, Texas A&M, the Extension Service, and how it became co-opted by corporate interests and working against the common interests. And Hard Tomatoes, Hard Times came from the fact that Del Monte Corporation in California had gotten the University of California at Davis, the land-grant college there, to build them a tomato harvesting machine because they didn't like farm workers. So they wanted to harvest mechanically. And so UC Davis, with our tax money, dutifully did it. But then there was a problem with the machine because it crushed the tomatoes. It was not a sensitive machine. And so that was no problem, though, because they then got UC Davis and the University of Florida to create a tomato that would not be crushed by the machine. And that's where that hard little nugget that was in the cellophane packages came from, the hard tomatoes. And the hard times came from the fact that that machine, upon introduction within just a couple of years, put 5,000 California tomato growers out of business, put thousands of farm workers out of work. In Hawaii as well. All right, all across, exactly right. And that's the power that they use. Well, in doing this book, DeMarco was doing the research, and she was this little petite thing, and she'd go into the U.S. Department of Agriculture, just be so innocent, and say, well, tell me what you're doing. What is this about, this machine here, and these tomatoes? And she was talking to one USDA official there, and about the tomato, and he was the official, knew about this uncrushable tomato. And he was bragging about how wonderful this was. And she said, well, yes, but, these off-season supermarket tomatoes that she had tried had no taste. And other than actual shape, they bore no relationship to the actual tomatoes she'd grown up with in New Jersey, which was a major tomato-producing area. And he leaned into her and he said, your children will never know the difference. Well, that's when we knew we had them, because we knew that a coalition of farmers, farm workers, consumers, environmentalists, nutritionists, and et cetera, were not going to take this for the long haul. More on that in a minute. Then I moved on into working with Fred Harris, who had been carrying a number of the issues that we worked on in the Agribusiness Project and elsewhere. He not only got it, but he was willing to act on it. And I later ended up in '76 being his campaign coordinator for President of the United States, making Fred what he is today, professor in Albuquerque, New Mexico. But I learned three important lessons from Fred, and that is, one, the power of storytelling. You need to be able to tell a story. Too often we get involved in facts and details and lose the bigger story that communicates with people. My friend Van Jones pointed out to me that liberals too often, do get lost in facts, and they mistake the bigger story. He points out that Martin Luther King Jr. did not say, I have a position paper.